Hello, I'm Bill Laveris. I'm the Content Director of the Mobile Enterprise 360 community, and I'm joined today by Jack Gold, who was principal and founder of J. Gold Associates. Jack is also a very well-known pundit and industry analyst. He's been around quite a while in a number of different capacities, and he's one of the more intelligent observers in the industry, certainly that I know. Recently, his company completed a survey of some 270 North American companies titled Enterprise Mobile Applications, a study of strategies and adoption trends. Jack, thank you very much for joining me here today.
Thank you, Bill. It's great to be here with you.
So in terms of the results that you got from this study, was there anything in the findings that surprised you?
Well, there were a few interesting points. We, of course, asked a lot of questions, probably about 70 questions in total, and it got into some great depth, so there are a lot of interesting data points. But let me throw a few at you, which I think the audience might be a little surprised at. So number one, let's talk about mobile strategies. One of the questions we asked is, do you have a mobile strategy in place? If you don't, are you pursuing one? Do you have a group that's chartered with putting it together, et cetera? What we found was that only 21% of the companies we asked actually had a mobile strategy in place. Now, given that most of the companies, or all of the companies that filled out the survey, had some mobile apps, that's alarming. 8% said they had a strategy, but it hadn't been approved yet. 25% said they have a team that's developing a strategy. So essentially 45% of the companies that we surveyed had no mobile strategy. They were just going basically by the seat of their pants. The other thing we found was that, and this probably isn't much of a surprise, but the average number of users at companies that are not paying for smartphones, so it's BYOD, bring your own device, is increasing. And in fact, we asked what it will look like in 1 year and in 3 years from now, and we found that the average number of users in a company on BYOD, or a company not paying for those smartphone devices, will double, or nearly double in the next 3 years. The same is true for tablets. It's not quite as high. It's a little bit less than smartphones, but so there are a lot of companies that are looking at BYOD tablets as well. It's no surprise BYOD is going to continue to expand in most companies, but actually there are going to be some limits around BYOD as well. Mm-hmm. We also asked about replacement. We see a lot in the press about people thinking that the PC is dead and that tablets are going to replace PCs and smartphones and everything else. We don't believe that PC is dead. It's just morphing. But what we found from our survey was that 40% of our respondents think that the tablet's going to replace a laptop, while 60% of the respondents say it will supplement. So it's not going to be replacement, it's going to be in addition to. So 60% of their workers, they think, will have tablets and smartphones, and laptops. When we asked that same question about smartphones, only 20% of the respondents thought that tablets would replace their smartphones. And finally, one more point that might be actually a bit alarming is that when we asked whether any of the companies that had a security breach based on mobile devices or because of their mobile devices, 42% of the companies say they have never experienced a security breach at all, while 22% say they don't know if there's one. I think this is very wishful thinking. 63% of companies say that they've not had a mobile breach. It's almost certain that they have, and they just haven't discovered it.
Yeah, well, alarming is really the right word there, Jack. I mean, 21% actually having a policy, and we know that the proliferation of these devices, as your research points out, and as anecdotal evidence would show, the mobile world is absolutely exploding. What does this mean for IT in general? I mean, particularly when we look at this data security piece of it here that you mentioned, what is all this? How does all this net out for IT?
Well, I think one of the lessons from an IT perspective is that they're woefully behind the curve. IT is being reactive rather than proactive, and that's one of the other things that we found in our survey from a cost perspective, from a support perspective. They're having to react to what the rest of the organization is doing rather than leading. And this presents a couple of different problems to the organization. Number one, let's talk about the strategy piece. If you don't have a strategy, how do you know where you're going? How do you know how to react? How do you know what to put in place? How do you know what your infrastructure needs to look like? If you don't have a strategy, how do you invest for 1, 3, 5 years out down the road? You can't, and that's what we're finding. Now, to IT's credit, or not so much their credit, but in their defense, I guess would be a better term, their budgets have been cut dramatically over the last few years, and they haven't really been involved in a lot of these decisions. So they're trying to react with reduced resources, with reduced expertise in mobile, because they just haven't had the time to go out and learn it all. And they're still trying to support other things in the organization that are deemed critical. So it is going to be very, very difficult. It's also important to note that the role of IT in making these decisions has changed. When we did the survey, we found that fully 2/3 of the decision makers for mobile use, for mobile solutions, were line of business execs and not IT. Yes, they consulted with IT, but it was led by the line of business execs, with IT coming along and then basically having to do the work to make it work, if they could. If not, the line of business users would just go out and find another way to do it through a third-party solution or hosting or whatever. So the role of IT around mobility is changing dramatically over what it was before with non-mobile environments.
Yeah, Jack, and I've seen some IDG research that backs up your research, that line of business, that is to say non-IT execs, are getting much more involved in some of the decision-making around mobility. With the mobile clients, I mean, and the people who use them eventually and even currently wanting to access the same data that they access on, say like so-called, IT-endorsed devices like laptops, isn't this really dangerous after a while?
It can be. It doesn't have to be. But the way many companies are dealing with this is, and again, because IT doesn't have the resources necessarily to do this correctly, especially with BYOD devices, is they're looking for splints. They're looking for some duct tape. They're looking for ways to attach something to that device to make it safe to access information. And there are a lot of companies that have built mobile application management schemes or solutions. I shouldn't call them schemes because they do more or less work. There are mobile device management solutions. There are a lot of companies that are adding those on for BYOD. At the end of the day, however, a lot of those things are really splices onto the tree, if you will, and it's not clear how well they're going to work. What's better, of course, longer term, is if that gets built into the devices, built into the operating system, and ultimately built into the applications as well. And that's where we see this going long term. But in the meantime, companies need to do something, and that's where they're going with this.
Okay, fascinating stuff, Jack. There's a ton of information in your study. I've gone through it. Can you just tell us quickly how people might be able to get hold of a copy or an executive summary or something like that?
Sure, I'd be glad to. So it's available by contacting us. You can purchase a copy, of course, by either contacting us or going to our website at www.jgoldassociates, it's all one word, .com, and there's information there about it as well.
That's great, Jack. Well, look, Jack Gold, principal and founder of J. Gold Associates, thank you very much for being my guest here today. Terrific information.